In this video, I'm going to show you how we are going to set these trusses by hand manually. And if you're new to this channel, my name's Josh. This channel is all about DIY to save a ton of money. So be sure to subscribe, ring that bell so you get a notification every time I release a new video, and hammer that like button for me. It's all I ask in return for making this video. We got a lot to go over today, so let's get started. Because of how small this truss is, even with it prepared, wasn't too bad for two guys to handle. Here's the gable wall that we're going to be setting the gable truss on. What we do before setting the truss is we're going to place a nailer that's going to be for the truss itself, and it's also going to act as a drywall nailer on the inside. Because this wall is 18 feet long, we got a 16-foot 2x6. Then we'll have to finish up the ends to complete the run. So I'm going to place this up here, and I'm going to use a 2x4 block to space off the edge of the wall. You could chalk a line if your wall was perfectly straight, but we found it's best if there's any variation just to use a 2x4 block to use as a spacer as we nail the board on. So I'm going to lay this up here now. And we're going to place a couple nails every 16 inches to hold this board down. Placing the 2x4 upright gives you the perfect 1.5 inch spacing for your nailer. Throughout this video, you will see that we are working in the trusses and on the roof. We always wear a safety harness for installing shingles or a similar type of job, but when setting trusses and starting a roof, you're kind of limited on options. We have been in construction for many years and have much experience setting trusses and working on a roof, and we are working on our own property here, but any roof work can be dangerous, and ultimately your safety is your responsibility. It's very important that you place what are called strong backs. Some people call them stiff backs. They're boards that catch the gable truss whenever you lift it up into place so it doesn't fall over the edge of the house. Very, very important. And if this was a tall gable truss, we would actually place another board on the side here to create kind of an L shape to help stiffen it up even more. But because this is a little gable truss, it doesn't need that additional support. And also we're going to mark the center here on the nailer that we just added, so that way we can line up the truss in the center of this wall whenever we stand it up. We also place kicker boards on each side of the wall as well to catch the edges. The function is the same thing as the stiff back, so the edge of the truss doesn't go off the edge of the wall. We're now going to carry this side of the gable truss and lay it on the wall, then we're going to lift the other side up onto this wall. We'll also want to make sure that we measure and mark the center of the truss here so we can line it up with our center mark up on the wall. Building a house, we typically would use a crane. In fact, we always have, but this one we wanted to try doing it ourselves by hand. We have set small garages before by hand, but this was going to be a good challenge. Now that we got the one side up on the wall, we're going to place the other side up on this wall. The great thing about using a crane, you would simply lift this right into place and then anchor it to the nailer. Also, you can lift all the roof sheathing and place it inside the house instead of carrying it in by hand, so there's many perks to having a crane on site for the truss installation. Now that each end is sitting on the wall, we're going to pivot it up to sit on top of the ladder to hold it temporarily until we get under to flip it up. All right, we're going to lift this up a little higher. All right, hold on. Ready? Go. All right. We have that lifted up into place. We now need to have him hold it while I center it. If you're curious how we install trusses with a crane, I'll put a link to that video in the description below, but it wasn't just any crane. You'll have to see the video for yourself. I'm going to hold this brace while he goes around back and place a screw into the stiff back to hold that into place temporarily. He came out here and placed screws in through this stiff back, and now that's what's holding this gable truss. I'm now going to nail off this bottom into that nailer that we placed on the wall before setting the truss. Be sure to use nails long enough to penetrate through the bottom cord of the truss into that nailer. You're looking for a nail that's over 3 inches long or greater, or you could use screws. Now that this gable is temporarily set and braced, we're going to place a string line on the outside on this tail, and I like to space the string line off 1.5 inches, so that way we can measure up to the truss, because if you put the string line right on it, over several trusses, it could push out on that string line and not really realize it, so it's best to be able to measure up to the truss. Off the wall, we need to measure over 1 foot on the other side to secure the chalk line. Due to this offset, we measured over to match the overhang of the truss, and then when we get to the other wall, we're going to have to start another string line. We're now going to place a 2 foot on center layout where the truss are going to hit on the walls. So they're going to have a break right on top of a stud. If you've been following my videos, you know that these studs were supposed to break right on top of a truss down to the stud, then down to the floor joist. So we're going to put our 2 foot on center layout now. Take note of the layout after it's on the plate. You can see that is laying out to where every 4th stud has a truss sitting directly on top of it. As far as plumbing up this gable truss, typically we would plumb it up and brace it to the outside. But because we don't have any material long enough to get clear down to the outside, we're actually going to set a couple trusses here. Then we're going to do diagonal bracing and then brace it to the floor to secure them all plumb. I have an 8 foot 2x4 here, and I'm going to place a 2 foot on center layout on it as well. So as we install the trusses that's going to go in the middle, we're going to line up on that 2 foot on center. We find it's best to place it on the edge. You can see it better before nailing. Place it on the top, it's hard to line up. Place it at the bottom, you have to look under. So right on the edge, 2 foot on center. So we'll nail this flush to that gable on the wood, not the sheathing, and then that's going to give us our layout to go. All right, we're going to set this first truss here, and when we stand it up, we're going to have to place that brace across top first, then we're going to get on the string line, just because that's going to hold it temporarily until we do that. Just so you know, when I mentioned that this roof was a 4.5 12 pitch, that means every 12 inches the roof drops 4.5 or rises 4.5 inches. For a shingled roof, I would not recommend any less than a 4/12 pitch. All right, these little trusses clearly are not that hard to handle, but a big truss would be very complicated. It was relatively difficult to start the first truss simply because I needed to have support while I nailed the brace on top, because I could not hold the truss and nail the brace at the same time. And on top of that, it was very hard to get the brace up high enough to where I wanted it. So I had to really extend and reach to get there and nail it on. And then I double checked the measurements just to make sure our spacing was right from the marks we made on the 2x4, and they were. So that was how it was starting the first truss. That's temporarily holding the correct spacing. We now need to nail it on the layout on each end of the truss and get it on the string line. This is one of the most critical parts to setting trusses, is making sure we are on the string line correctly. If you start running off with your string line, your whole roof will run off and you cannot fix it until you move every individual truss. Here we set the trusses up on the wall, then slid them into place, and before we got closed in on this room, we slid many trusses up on the pre-existing interior walls, which was a nice plus. And then after we set the trusses, we double checked to make sure everything was running plumb. Everything was running plumb, looking really good. We added the brace down below and secured them, because you want to make sure you brace really, really well as you go. You do not want your trusses falling over after you get so many up. So we are big on bracing and using adequate bracing throughout the whole installation. We are at the point where we need to transition from the regular trusses back to a gable truss. Due to these interior walls, we were able to slide the trusses up on, which made it really nice and easy. The strategy that we're going to use for this gable truss is we are going to prep it on top of the interior walls. That way we will not have to lift the gable truss onto the walls after it is prepped. We're going to use a framing square, get our 4.5 12 pitch whenever we cut our sheathing to prep the gable truss. And one thing about this gable truss, you do not have to sheet all of it. There's only the top half that's going to be exposed and need blocking. Here's a little tip when you got to cut multiple angles. Keep the scrap piece after you cut one angle and use that as a template to get the angle of your next piece. You can see we did that method here. So you can see we have about a 2 foot section that needed the actual sheathing and blocking. I'm going to finish prepping this gable truss on top of the interior walls, similar to how we did the first gable truss. You may be wondering, why do we shrink down to 18 feet on this part of the house? It was primarily to give the house a little more architectural look and design, and it's going to help set off the house a little more. We now replace the string line onto the next wall to continue running our trusses. notice the trusses that are going to be for a cantilevered porch covering is going to have a support right on top of the wall. We're now at the point where we got to install the girder truss, and something about the girder truss, this is going to be a 2-ply, and the biggest difference between the truss that we've been setting and this truss is that there's a 2x6 bottom cord, and that's going to help increase the strength, make it more load bearing. And the second ply is identical to this one, so after we set this, we're going to have to set up the other ply. We then have to nail it together. In order to set this exactly where it belongs, we must figure for the trusses that are going to come in and intersect into it and the overhang that's going off that side of the house. So what we did is place the string line on that side of the house, and you always go off your longest walls that do not have any offsets for your string line. But once we did that, we took the measurement of the truss that's going to intersect into it and marked it on the wall, and that's going to be the edge of the girder. So that's a very important concept to note, and we're going to screw this end on the sides because we find it's best just to screw it in, because if you do have to manipulate some to get it tight up to the truss for whatever reason, you can easily move it. So we're going to set this first ply up into place, then the second ply, and nail it together. Now that we got the girder set into place, what he's doing now is putting the 2-foot on center layout coming off that wall for the trusses that are going to intersect into that girder truss. And you may have noticed during that time lapse, we nailed off this girder truss front and back. You can see we have the nails going up and down the whole truss, and we got alternating nails going across this bottom cord. So it should be very strong. It's in order to hold all this roof. That's what you want. So after he puts that layout on, we're going to put the joist hangers, or in this case it's truss hangers, to hold the truss that are going to intersect into the girder truss. In order to install the hangers, very straightforward. We just got to hold the hanger flush with the bottom of the girder and nail it onto the layout. We're going to be using 1.5" 9-gauge joist hanger nails. So we're going to hold this here now and nail it into place. Now that I got this side tacked on, I'm going to use a scrap 2x6 hold into place, and then make sure that it's held in the correct width here. And that looks good. And we're now going to nail this side. We're now going to install all of these onto the layout. It can be difficult to install these short nails without hitting your fingers. The best method that I've found was using a pair of needle nose pliers to hold the nails if you're going to hammer them in, but using a metal strap nailer is going to be the easiest option. You can see the color orange at the end of all these trusses. That's because they were all meant to go together on the same side of the house. When we get to the other section of the house, you'll notice that the tails are going to be orange facing away from the driveway. We are installing the stiff backs here for the next gable truss. In order to set this gable truss and the trusses that set into the hangers, we actually built a wall here to set on before setting them into the hangers, and we're actually going to set up some scaffolding here because we want to build our ladders for our overhangs while we have it setting down before we stand it up, just to save work later off a ladder. We want to try to avoid that, so that's how we're going to approach this. Also, this wall is going to be repurposed into the wall. It's going to divide the kitchen from the living room anyways, so that was a good idea, so knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. So we're going to set up the scaffolding now and set our gable truss up on it. can now place our block on the tail of the gable truss to continue using the string line. We did cut a slope onto this brace so that way it will have more surface area where it comes in contact with the gable truss when we brace it. And also these trusses here are called scissor trusses because as you can see they're in the shape of a scissor. We just got all the scissor truss set, and that wall technique worked out great. They went right into the brackets when we stood them up, no problem. And also the scaffolding, how we had it set up for the gable, worked out phenomenal as well. So when we set that gable, we got our 10.5 inch overhang, and then we set our girder truss tight up against that. And now we have a little gap here in between all these trusses, even with our correct overhang. So like I said earlier, the reason why we place screws on these sides is for this exact reason. We're going to take the screws out and wedge it tight into those trusses to take that gap out before we anchor the hangers to the trusses. Here where we place the screws, I'm going to take them out now. I'm going to use the sledgehammer and try to drive that girder truss to tighten up those gaps. In order to draw the girder truss tight to the trusses, I'm going to drive 5-inch screws into each one of the trusses, so that way this is definitely going to be tight and secure against the trusses. Now that we have the girder truss exactly where we need it, we're going to toe nail it on both sides into place. Before closing in the living room area with trusses, we're going to install part of the garage trusses first. In order to install them, we needed to set up scaffolding and some bracing in order to slide the truss across from the living room over to the garage. After we had the system set up, it actually worked relatively well. We walked the truss as if we were going to set it on the other side and then slid them over using 2x4s. We prepped the gable truss just like we did on the other side of the house, setting up next to the scaffolding. After we have it built, we stood it right up. Because we did not have a board long enough to reach up into this gable to brace it, we placed bracing on the bottom cord first, and then we placed a brace from the peak of the gable down to it. We now have all the trusses set. You can see it ran with our string line very well. If we eyeball down where they all line up, you can see it looks really good. We're removing the wall that we had stood up to hold the scissor trusses, and that's going to be repurposed for the kitchen dividing wall in between the living room and the kitchen. I will admit it's much easier to set trusses with a crane than by hand. I highly recommend that you get a crane to set your trusses. You can see setting that wall to hold the trusses until we set them worked great. Then we repurposed that wall into to the actual wall that we're going to use to finish up this kitchen. We have that anchored and secured, and that worked out awesome. We now need to nail off these hangers to secure the truss even further to the girder. Now that we have the trusses set, we're going to install the subfacial boards and install the roof sheathing. Enjoy this time lapse. If you'd like to learn more how we got started building this house, I'll put a link in the description to my YouTube memberships. Also, you can tap the join button below or scan the QR code that's on the screen. If you'd like to see step-by-step how we built this house and framed this roof, check out this video. It'll help you out.